We welcome in our NHL Network insider, Elliotte Friedman. Elliotte, before we get to the Flyers and the trade deadline, let's start with the news coming out of Canada yesterday that the government expected to approve that 7-day quarantine period for NHLers traded before the deadline. How big of a game changer is this, and does that directly affect the trade that we saw earlier today with Eric Staal?
I don't believe in coincidences, Jameson. I certainly don't believe there was a coincidence that the Eric Staal trade today happened after that announcement occurred. When we'd heard, obviously, as everybody else did, that Eric Staal was going to be available from Buffalo. And I think there were teams in Canada that inquired about him. And it was made pretty clear that Eric Staal was not really interested in a 14-day quarantine. And I will say this, some of the Canadian teams apparently said it didn't make sense to take a 36-year-old player and have him go through a quarantine after Dubois, of that length, after Dubois had a problem with it earlier, and he's 22. So, yes, I do think it had a huge impact on this particular move. I think Staal's much more willing to consider a 7-day one. I think Montreal felt it was much better to do a 7-day one, and I don't think there's any surprise that that deal happened one day after that was announced. Now, we're still waiting for exact clarity on this. Our government kind of works in mysterious ways, and I don't know if this is actually down on paper yet, but we are believing that this is going to happen.
All right, so let's say that this goes down on paper soon, and now we've had that first, so to speak, trade ahead of the trade deadline. Do you think that really picks up the pace here and other GMs kind of hop in and start to make some moves? And if so, who are some of the names out there and teams out there we really need to watch closely?
Well, I do think that Winnipeg is going to add a defenseman, and I think the Jets, and we mentioned before, Dubois, that situation they went through where he was out for 2 weeks because of the quarantine. When he came back, he got hurt. And, that Winnipeg definitely, can they 100% link the Dubois injury to the quarantine? No, but I think they definitely feel comfortable in saying that that was a factor. So I do believe that Winnipeg will be a team now that will say, okay, we're a bit more comfortable with this than we were under a second try to 14-day one. I think Toronto's the other team that's going to add to, and I'm not convinced Montreal is done. So, we'll kind of see where this all goes, but I think those are three teams right away that are going to jump right back into it.
Interesting. Something else we're certainly keeping our eye on is the NCAA men's hockey tournament. It is officially in full swing as they got underway earlier today. Any potential big free agents on the radar of NHL teams out there?
Well, before we go to free agents, we should mention that with Wisconsin's upset loss today, there are two players. Cole Caulfield, who's the likely Hobey Baker winner. He could go to Montreal. Dylan Holloway was Edmonton's first-round draft pick. He could end up there. I think those are two situations we're going to watch in the short term. Now, unrestricted free agents, the guy who's getting most of the attention this year and seems to be the player that's number one on most of the list is Matt Kierstead, who's defenseman at North Dakota. Now, North Dakota's the number one seed. I think he's the guy that, if you were to ask everybody who's kind of the prospect that is atop the list, he's the one. So we'll see how long North Dakota goes. Obviously, he's going to want to put this off as long as possible. But I think, Jameson, one of the things that normally happens is the Final Four, the Frozen Four, I should say, corresponds with the end of the regular season. That's not the case this time. So it gives these players who are coming out a bit more of an advantage in terms of picking teams and maybe burning a year. The other one is the North Dakota captain, Kawaguchi. Some teams like him a lot more than others. But I think when his run is over, I do believe there could be some teams that decide to go after him pretty hard. He's a free agent, too.
Yeah, we're used to seeing these college guys get right down their collegiate careers and jump right into the NHL playoffs. Cale Makar, Charlie McAvoy, some of the most recent guys that come to mind. And it's amazing how these guys just jump right in and have an instant impact. So we'll wait and see on those collegiate athletes. Let's get back to the NHL guys and maybe the biggest buzz surrounding the trade deadline right now in Buffalo, Taylor Hall. What do you make of those comments last night? What are you hearing today about him?
Jameson, when he was asked last night post-game, would he accept, because he's got a no-trade clause, would he accept a trade? I don't understand how anybody could be surprised that Taylor Hall would say yes. And, it's been that kind of a year in Buffalo, and, I can't blame anyone for saying, they'd like to go somewhere where you could maybe contend for a playoff berth and possibly more. I do believe there are some teams that are in on Taylor Hall. To me, the question is, Like I said on Buffalo Radio yesterday, I think it's going to be hard for them to get a first-round pick for him. And some people reacted as if I insulted the player and his entire family. It really isn't about that. It's such a buyer's market right now. I think it's going to be hard for some of these teams with rentals to maximize their returns. I actually thought Buffalo did pretty well getting a third and a fifth for Eric Staal. There were teams who didn't believe they could do that well. So, I think that shows you where the market is for rentals. I do think there's some interest in him. I think the Islanders are one. I think Florida potentially is another. But we'll see where this goes. It's going to come down on price. And the best thing that will happen for the Sabres is you get a bidding war that drives up the price, because that's what Buffalo wants.
All right, we shall wait. We shall see how it all plays out. Lots, you've intrigued him over there from Brian Lawton.
Well, I got to say, I wore the turtleneck again, Jameson, because Lots liked it yesterday. And I've given up trying to look as good as Kevin Weeks. Like, nobody looks as good as him. Yeah. So I figured I'd just go with the turtleneck again because Brian liked that look.
I was thinking you were out of clean shirts, Elliotte.
Breach, listen, Breach, I love the turtleneck. I see you've been rocking them. I have been as well. Shout out to Jess Chambers up there at Sportsnet. She's awesome. Style
Jess
is great.
And Deb Berman, the MVPs of Sportsnet.
Absolutely.
Look good, feel good.
You
broadcast
too.
Good.
These are the only two guys I know that can rock a turtleneck on TV.
I'll tell you this, Elliotte. He actually, Brian Lawton put one on the other day, came down the day after that
I was out of
Kevin wore the turtleneck, and he came into my office and he goes, nope, not for me. And then changed shirt and tie. So only certain people can rock it, and you, sir, are one of them. So take that for what it's worth.
Thanks a lot, guys. Have a great weekend.
See you, Elliotte.
You too, buddy.
Take care.